Are you a rapper that struggles to rap over parts of the instrumental that does not have any drums? If so, stop beating yourself up about it, okay? Today I'm going to be sharing with you 3 of my favorite techniques that I've used to help my students one-on-one that I've coached privately throughout the years overcome this exact issue. And I know for a fact if you apply these techniques that I'm going to share with you in this video, it's going to help you do the exact same. So without further ado, let's get it. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Cole Mize with ColeMizeStudios.com, where it's my main goal to help you be a better rapper now. Before we dive deep into this video tutorial, I just wanted to give you a heads up that I've already done a part 1 to this video called Advanced Ear Training Techniques for Rappers Part 1. So if you have not seen that video, make sure you watch it in tandem with this video, because I also share a lot of more good information in that video that connects with this video as well. I'll post a link to that in the video's description below if you want to check that out. Now, when you're first learning as a rapper how to stay on beat, I recommend that you follow the drums. It's almost like some training wheels, because typically the kicks will always land on the first and third beat, and the snares will land on the second and fourth beat. And in particular, I recommend that you focus on the snares over the kicks, because kick drums are usually lower in frequency, and snares are usually higher in frequency. What that means is basically lower frequencies like kick drums. They're harder to hear on smaller speakers like laptops and cell phones, for an example. Snare drums typically are made up primarily of higher frequencies, so it's a lot easier to hear the snare drums typically than kick drums. So if you're going to focus on the drums, start by just focusing on the snare drums. Again, those land on the second and fourth beat of each bar in most cases. Now, while this is a great way to get your bearings around listening to the beats and stuff in the music, I don't recommend that you stay here. You want to move on beyond relying on the drums to help you maintain your rhythm, because drums are not always going to be present in the instrumental, and you should never feel handicapped to the point where you feel like you can only rap over parts of the instrumental where there's drums. Okay, you need to be able to rap over any part of the instrumental regardless of what's going on. So one really powerful technique that I've used with my students to help them overcome this issue is focus on the melody instead of the drums. So typically there's 2 main types of elements in every instrumental. You have what you would call your more rhythmic driven elements. That's typically drums a lot of times. And then you have your elements that are more melodic, more, if you can think about them as people, right? You can think of singers as the melodic elements, and you can think of your rappers as like the drum elements. Rappers typically are going a lot faster, right? Faster, more aggressive elements. And singers, sorry you had to hear that. But singers are typically more melodic, right? More chill and relaxed, more soothing. Okay, so think about every element in the instrumental that you hear is falling in one of those 2 categories: singing or melodic, or rapping and more rhythmic driven, more aggressive. So try to focus on the main melodic pattern of the instrumental. Typically, not always, but typically these are present during the intro of the instrumental, because the intro is the introduction. It's introducing you to patterns and stuff in the music. So typically, not always, but typically there's usually some type of melodic pattern during the intro of an instrumental. And what you hear during the intro, a lot of times is present throughout the majority, if not all of the instrumental. And this is because in most instrumentals, they will create a build. So they'll start during the intro without drums a lot of times. This leaves the producer room to actually build that instrumental throughout the entire instrumental, so it can build energy. So it doesn't just stay like the same energy the entire time. So usually on the intro, this is where a lot of times where some type of melody will be introduced. So pay very close attention as soon as you begin playing an instrumental. See if there's a melodic pattern there in the intro, and see if you can identify where it loops back around to the beginning of that same melodic pattern. And if you can do this, then you can then divide the bar up into even sections. And then that's where you get your beats. So the main thing in addition to that to listen for is see if you can identify the length of the loop of that melodic pattern. It's very common for these loops to be 1 bar in length, but also sometimes it can be 2 bars or 4 bars. It's not common for it to be longer than 4 bars. So if you can identify the length of it, then you can start dividing it from there, and that'll help you wrap your mind, no pun intended, wrap your mind around what you're listening to in regards to that pattern. And if you can do that successfully, you won't be guessing as much how long the pattern is. If you can measure it and you understand if it's either 1 bar, 2 bar, or 4 bars of a loop, it's going to eliminate all the guessing work, and what you're listening to won't sound random. It's going to start being like super duper obvious to you how long that pattern is. So you know exactly where it begins and where it's going to loop back around at. All right, so now I'm going to jump into Studio One right here, and I'm going to play the very beginning of an instrumental that I produced called Fairy Tales. And I'm going to talk about this melodic pattern that we're discussing right now. If you like this instrumental, you can also purchase this instrumental by clicking the link in the video's description to go to my beat store. All right, let's check it out. Okay, and as you can see here on this waveform, this is another advantage of using a DAW when you're doing ear training stuff, because you have an actual visual to go along with what you're listening to. These large spikes right here, this is where the drums come in. This is what we call transients in the music world. All right, so you can tell the intro just by visually looking at it. It's right here all the way up until bar 5 right here. Okay, so I'm just going to play a little bit of this melody, and I'm going to help deconstruct it to help your ears focus on specific things. Let's check it out. Okay, now we're into the hook part. All right, so I want you to pay very, very close attention. As soon as I hit play, you're going to hear a sound, an instrument. Listen. Did you hear that? That. Duh. And then right after that, you hear these flutes come in. It goes da 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 da. Right after that first hit. Da 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 da. All right, pay attention to just that first hit. And if you can lock your ear onto that, you can hear once that same instrument does its second note. All right, check it out. All right, now this time I'm going to kind of sing along with it. Please forgive me, I'm no singer, but I'm going to kind of sing quietly to kind of mimic that what I'm trying to get you to focus on, because there's several instruments playing right here, but focus on this one element. Doom, doom, doom. Let me play it back again. All right, this time I'm gonna sing along with it again. Listen. Doom, 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 doom. Just focus on that. If you can lock onto that, you will be able to stay on beat throughout this entire instrumental. All right, because that's pretty much present throughout most of this instrumental, if not all of it. Let's listen to it again. One, two, three, four. One, two. Even though right now there's drums playing and there's other elements being brought into it, that same thing that I just locked onto is still present. Let me play it back again. Here's the beginning. I'm just going to kind of jump forward. Do, 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 do. Pay attention. Do, 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 do. So if you can lock onto that, this will be a lot easier, because there's a lot of different instruments being played. You know, you got different percussive elements on the drums. There's several different instruments that you could consider a part of the melody. You could lock onto any of those, but for this demonstration, I'm just showing you one that you could lock onto, and it's a really simple one. It's almost like just a really easy 4 count. Check it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So if you can lock onto that, you're set. And again, another part of this is being able to measure the length of the pattern. All right, this is really big because it helps you wrap your head around what you're listening to, and it makes it so obvious to you. If you're not able to measure the length of it correctly, then you may feel like you're somewhat in the dark or kind of playing a guessing game, and it can really mess with your confidence mentally when you're doing something over music. So you want to be able to wrap your head around it and be sure of how you're making sense of what you're listening to. So let's check it out again and let's measure it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's repeating. Boom. So that was 2 bars. Technically, this beat is 95 beats per minute. So you can count it like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So it could be 2 bars normal time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. And one more piece of advice for doing this type of exercise is don't rush it. Don't listen to like really long pieces of the instrumental if you're struggling to make sense of it. Just pick like 4 bars and see if you can wrap your head around those 4 bars. And typically, if you can do that, then you're going to have a pretty good understanding of the entire beat if you're able to lock on to some of those parts that you hear constantly being played throughout the instrumental. Okay, the second very powerful technique that I recommend to help train your ears to stay on beat during parts of the instrumental where there's no drums is by simply using a metronome. This is something that even though my ears are very, very well trained, I still will use this a lot when I'm working with my students on songs and stuff like that. If there's a part of a song that doesn't have any drums, I will use a metronome just to allow me to knock out what I'm working on so much faster. And this is really handy on trap style instrumentals because there's a lot of times where there's like 2 to 4 bars of the instrumental that has no drums either leading into the hook or coming out of the hook on the beginning of the first verse, or it could be a bridge section. And in order for this to work, you have to make sure that the instrumental is aligned to the grid correctly within your DAW. Now, if I sound like I'm speaking like a foreign language when I say that, I've already done a video tutorial that explains exactly how to do that. It's a video tutorial I did called the 5 reasons why you should be using a DAW for songwriting. So if you haven't seen that, be sure to check that out because I go into great detail on exactly how to do this. But once you've aligned it to the DAW correctly, it's simple. You just engage the metronome, and then now you'll start hearing the clicks, or it's also known, the metronome is also called a click track. And so you'll start hearing it make click sounds to the beat of each bar. This is very, very helpful. So let's take a look at that as well within Studio One. Okay, and in Studio One, I'm just gonna go down here and engage the metronome by clicking this little guy. And I'm just gonna play it again from the beginning. And now you're gonna hear a little click, which is the metronome. Check it out. Hear that? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's that simple. Metronomes are very, very powerful. And again, don't be ashamed to use this. It's something I still use a lot when I'm working it against the clock and I'm trying to knock some stuff out as quickly as possible. Hey, I'm gonna do what I gotta do. Metronomes are not sexy, but they're really helpful. They're very, very powerful. And my third technique that I like to use is actually a game that I like to play with my students. It's like an ear training game called Guess That Beat. And the way that I typically do this is I'll just play the instrumental from random spots, because some people also lean heavy on hearing the instrumental from the very beginning in order for them to stay on beat. And so I intentionally will throw it around and just play it from some random spot within the instrumental. And I'll typically play it anywhere between 5 and 10 seconds, and then I'll stop it on a beat and see if they can guess which beat that I stopped it on. And once they start being able to identify those beats correctly, I will continue to shorten the amount of time that I play the instrumental. Again, testing how quickly they can identify the beat correctly. And I'll do this all the way down to the point where I won't even be playing the instrumental for longer than maybe 1 to 2 beats, and then seeing if they can guess it. Again, that's playing it from a random spot within the instrumental. And everyone eventually will get to that point. I mean, you should get to a point to where you can pretty much play any song and it could be a totally new song to you, and you can lock onto the beats that quickly. Just a couple of beats and you got it. You locked into it. That's eventually where you'll get. But don't beat yourself up if you're not there yet. You get there by practice. And again, not overwhelming yourself. You know, you can focus on small pieces of the instrumental like I was just talking about and build yourself up to playing a game such as this. This is such a powerful technique. One, it's fun, but it's super powerful because it's really testing you on everything you've learned up until this point with your ear training. Because a lot of rappers I've noticed that I've coached, they'll be nodding their head on beat. So from the outside looking in, it looks like, man, they've got it. They're on beat. But if they don't identify, if they don't say which beat they're on, a lot of times I've noticed that some of them will be landing on beat, but in their mind, they're totally confused on which beat they're actually on. So for an example, the snare drum typically lands on the second and fourth beat. So by doing this game, I may stop on a snare, let's say the snare on the second beat, but they may go, number 4, you stopped on the fourth beat. I'm like, no, I stopped on the second beat. And they're just listening for the snares and they're not really being able to identify the beginning and ending points of the bars and stuff. And therefore they're kind of guessing on which beat the instrumental was or the snare was that I stopped the instrumental on. So this will really test how accurate you are with identifying the beats. So let me demonstrate this game to you real quick in Studio One. Now, again, it's super duper important that your instrumental is aligned to the grid correctly in order for this to work. And in addition to that, here's another pro tip, is in most DAWs, you have a choice of what the cursor does when you hit stop and when you hit play. So for an example, right now, the way I have it set up just for this tutorial is when I hit play, then I hit stop, the cursor stops exactly where I stopped it at. All right. But a lot of times, we'll also work with it returning to where we began playing it at. So if it's set to that, you need to change that, because here's the other setting. Watch how it changes now. I just changed the setting. Now when I hit stop, it's going to return to where I began playing it at. So let's say it's on the third bar right here. It's going to return back to that third bar when I hit stop again. Check it out. Boom, you see how it jumped back? And so to do this effectively, you don't need your cursor to do that. So you may have to Google or whatever and see how you can change that. Within Studio One, I'm just hitting these little dots down here. I right click and I hit, I deselect return to start on stop. And then now when I hit stop, it's going to stop wherever I stop it at. It's not going to return to where I began playing it from. Once again, boom, it stopped right there. Did not return back to where I began from. Okay, now let's make this a little bit more difficult, and I am going to disengage the metronome. You can engage the metronome for this practice as well if you need that assistance. But I know you can't see me right now on screen, but I'm literally going to just go somewhere, and I'm not looking. I'm just going to play some random part in the beat, and I'm just going to stop. And I'm going to say where I stop on, and then I'm going to look at the screen and see which beat I'm on. Check it out. 3. I said I stopped on the third beat. Now I'm going to zoom in, because you may not see the beats depending on how zoomed in or zoomed out you are, but I'm going to zoom in, and now I'm going to reveal the beats. Boom, I stopped right. You see where it says 12.3? I stopped on the third beat. Let me zoom back out again just to make it a little bit more difficult on myself. Let's do it again. So start somewhere else, anywhere. 1. First beat. Let's zoom in. Boom, right there. I stopped right there at the very beginning of bar 17. So this is a very, very helpful ear training technique that you can use by yourself. It's a fun, you can play it with your friends as well, but it's something like doing this in a DAW is very powerful because you get instant feedback on how well you're doing, you know, and I highly recommend this. This is super effective. And once again, it's super powerful because a lot of you guys and gals out there struggle with not getting feedback on how well you're doing, you know, unless you know someone where you're able to get that feedback, you may struggle to know if you're doing this correctly. Well, if you align the instrumental into the DAW's grid correctly, you're getting instant feedback on exactly which beat you're on. That way you know for sure if you're wrapping your head around the instrumental correctly, And again, you can do this during parts of the instrumental where there are no drums. Let me do that real quick. 3. All right, let's zoom in. Boom, you see that? 1.3. I stopped on the 3rd beat. So use that technique. I think that's really, really going to help you out. So quick recap. Number 1, first focus on the melody. Listen to the very beginning of the instrumental and see if you can wrap your head around some type of melodic element that's present throughout the entirety or the majority of the instrumental. If you can do that, then you won't have to be relying on drums to keep you on beat. And again, measure the length of the loop, of that melodic loop pattern. If you can do that, you can easily identify the length of the bars and start dividing those bars into 4 even sections, which we call beats. Tip number 2, use a metronome. Okay, don't make things more difficult than they have to be. Use a metronome over parts of the instrumental where there's no drums to help you more quickly identify where the beats are, and also to give yourself a sense of assurance or more confidence if you're not quite sure if you are landing on beat correctly during those parts. It's a great way to get some instant feedback. And then tip number 3, put your ear training like to the ultimate test while also having some fun and play the game, guess that beat. And again, it's crucial that you have the instrumental aligned to the grid correctly within your DAW of choice, and zoom in to make sure you can see which beat it is on, but just play it from different random parts of the instrumental and see how quickly you can guess the beat. Again, give yourself plenty of time when you first start doing this to make sure you're wrapping your head around it before you stop the instrumental and guess where you're at, and then continue to shorten the length that you're giving yourself to really test how quickly you're able to identify the beats correctly. Again, this is a super powerful technique because it gives you instant feedback on how well you're doing with this, and it's fun. So let me know if you're a rapper that struggled with rapping over parts of the instrumental that doesn't have any drums. Let me know which of these techniques that I just shared with you that you're most excited to try out for yourself. And if you're new to my channel, make sure you do not leave until you get yourself a copy of my ebook, The #1 Fundamental to Rapping. That's my gift to you. It's totally free. And this is going to help you wrap, no pun intended, your mind around how this whole rapping thing works. And it's going to share with you what I believe to be the #1 fundamental to rapping, which is going to help make sure that your songs keep your listener interested from beginning all the way to the end and leave them wanting more. And it's not too dense. It's an easy read. It's something you can consume within 20-30 minutes and you'll be off to the races. So again, you can get yourself a free copy by clicking the link at the top of the video description below. Again, my name is Cole Mize with ColeMizeStudios.com. I hope this video was helpful to you. And always remember, when it comes to rapping, there's no rules. There's only techniques. Peace. Hey man, you see that subscribe button right there? Kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it. Oh, and don't forget the bell icon. Kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it. Hey, I know you see that like button, right? Kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it. And look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself, today I'm gonna kill it, kill it, kill it.